Hello, hello. Welcome to Electric Vehicles, Rebates, the Climate, and You. My name is Crystal Beauclair. I'm a marketing associate at Forth, and I'll be handing over this webinar shortly to my colleagues, Steven and Whit. Please be sure to submit all questions through the attendee chat, where we'll answer them during the Q&A. We'll be sending out the webinar recording afterwards. So a little bit about Forth. Forth is a nonprofit trade association advocating for smart transportation. We work in four focused areas. We work for four focus areas: industry development, demonstration project, advocacy, and consumer engagement. We are advancing smart transportation. If you want more information, you can find more information on our website at forthmobility.org. And so today we'll be joined by our co-moderators, Forth's program manager, Steven Alaman, and Whit Jamieson, who is a program associate at Forth, and then as well as panelists Dave Reichmuth and Matthew Beyer from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So Steven manages the EV Ambassador program at Forth and organizes Ride and Drive's event in Oregon, Washington, and California. Prior to Forth, Steven worked for Multnomah County on urban forest management and community outreach. Steven holds a bachelor's, a BS in environmental sciences from the University of Oregon. And then we have Whit, who has been a program associate at Forth since early 2019. Whit specializes in EV and EV charging trends and has worked on a variety of programs, including workplace charging, multi-unit residences, electric tractors, utility partnerships, ride and drives, and much more. And without further ado, I'll let Whit and Steven introduce our panelists.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Crystal. I think we can actually jump straight into Matthew's introduction for Union of Concerned Scientists.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew. I am an outreach associate at the Union of Concerned Scientists. I know many of you on this call are part of our network of members and supporters, but I did want to take a moment for those of you who are not to explain who we are and what we do. UCS is a national organization. We put rigorous science to work in order to build a healthier and safer world. We do so by advancing science-based solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems, conducting rigorous technical analyses, and mobilizing our supporters to educate decision makers and advocate for change. We spent the past several years working right here in Oregon with Oregonians like you in order to address some of the state's most pressing issues, ranging from addressing climate change to ramping up renewable energy, building a healthier food system, and in the case of today's webinar, electrifying our transportation sector. In part, we're able to do this because we're supported by over 500,000 members and supporters across the country, about 7,000 of whom live right here in Oregon, as well as our UCS Science Network, which is a network of over 20,000 of the nation's top scientists who we are able to mobilize in order to take action. In terms of who we are, our staff consists of scientists, engineers, economists, and analysts, all of whom are poised to take action to address today's most pressing problems. One of those scientists is my colleague who you will hear from later today, Dave Reichman. Dave is a senior engineer in our Clean Transportation program and leads our work on vehicle technology and transportation electrification right here on the West Coast. And so I'm very excited that you'll have the opportunity to hear from Dave today, as well as our lovely partners here at Forth. And so without further ado, I will send it over to Dave.
Thanks, Matthew. As Matthew just said, I am with UCS. I am a senior engineer in our Clean Transportation program, and I work out of our Oakland, California office. I do hope someday to be able to come visit you all in Oregon sometime soon, whenever that becomes possible. So I just wanted to start just talking about what are EVs. Now, I think there's probably a lot of people on this webinar that already know exactly what EVs are and everything about them, but just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because it does get a little bit confusing especially for some people around the difference between like hybrids and plug-in hybrids. And so I just want to go over sort of the basics first before we dive into the benefits of electric vehicles. So we'll just start with sort of like what isn't an EV. So a conventional vehicle, these are, if you bought a car, in 1990 or earlier, this is what it was. It has a gasoline engine. There's no electric drive motor present. Gasoline provides 100% of the energy to drive that vehicle down the road. Pretty simple. Then we have the hybrids, the quote conventional hybrids, which they like the original Toyota Prius. Those vehicles do have an electric motor. It's used to increase the fuel economy of that vehicle. So that's good because we get lower emissions, higher fuel economy. However, it's important to remember that these vehicles, though they do have an electric motor, 100% of their energy is ultimately coming from gasoline or fossil fuels. And that's an important distinction from the next vehicle, the plug-in hybrid or PHEV. Now, the PHEV has both an electric motor and a battery and a gasoline engine. So with the electric motor and the battery, you can plug in the car and get some of your energy to drive from the electric grid. Now, when the battery is discharged, then the car can still move using the gasoline engine, and it can still go to a gasoline station for refueling. So you can get some of your power from the electric grid, and some of it's going to be coming from gasoline. And then the last vehicle is the battery electric vehicle, or BEV. This is an all-electric vehicle. So we have an electric motor and a battery. We're using grid electricity. There's no gasoline engine. And you're not going to be able to refuel at a gasoline station. You're going to use a charging station. Although it looks like at this one here in Oregon, we're actually at a charging station at a gasoline station. But so the vehicles that we're really focusing on for this presentation are those last two, the plug-in EVs, the plug-in hybrid and the battery electric vehicle. So those are the vehicles we're talking about. Now, why are we talking about those vehicles? And the reason is that because electric vehicles can be a solution for a number of issues that right now. So the first is climate change. We know that the effects of climate change are not theoretical, that they're happening now. Vividly with the increased occurrence and severity of wildfire in the western states, it's not just wildfire; it's the associated drought, extreme weather events, sea level rise. We're seeing all of these things happen, and we know that if we don't do anything about it, then the consequences will continue to grow. Another reason why we would be interested in electric vehicles is air pollution. So this is here is a picture of gasoline vehicles on a cold day. That is not really, that is water vapor you're seeing. It's not really air pollution, but I'm using this as an illustration because most of the pollutants that come from a modern gasoline vehicle that impact air quality and human health are invisible. So you're not going to see them coming out of the tailpipe. Nitrogen oxides, volatile organic gases, these are compounds that come from burning gasoline and combine in the atmosphere with water, sunlight, heat, and then get turned into particulate matter, which technically we term PM 2.5 for fine particulate matter. And this is one of the most, and this is the cause of the majority of negative health effects from transportation pollution. It is PM 2.5, and that is something that electric vehicles can switching from gasoline to clean electricity sources can help alleviate that issue. And the other thing I wanted to raise was just sort of, this isn't really on top of people's minds right now because we're in a period of relatively lower gasoline prices. But when you buy a gasoline car, it's important not just what the price of gasoline is today, but if you have that car for 10 to 15 years, you're really betting on what is going to be the price of that fuel, for a decade or more in advance. And we know that it just takes a Gulf hurricane or conflict in the Middle East or a number of other global or regional issues, a refinery fire, to have those prices of gasoline spike quite suddenly and to high levels. And the other thing for Oregon is that with really no petroleum resources or refining, is that all that money spent on gasoline and petroleum products really just leaves the state's economy. And so, that's why, I'd like to talk about some of the benefits of EVs, because they address some of these issues. First off, on global warming emissions. So when we look at the US, we look at emissions from transportation in terms of CO2 and other global warming emissions. We see that about just under 60% of all emissions come from light duty vehicles, and that means passenger cars and trucks, SUVs. Now, so there are emissions from heavy duty vehicles, from aircraft, ships, boats, what have you, but the majority of emissions in the US are coming from the cars that you and I drive. And so, and we think that EVs are a solution for those, to reduce those emissions. Now, before I get into some detailed analysis I've done, I just want to note that EVs are not a perfect solution. There still are emissions that are associated with electric vehicles. But EVs are much, much better than gasoline vehicles. And that's really the important point, is that we don't have to wait for electric vehicles to become perfect for them to be an important solution to reducing climate change and emissions. And the emissions from EVs, of course, don't, if you look at a battery electric car, it's not coming from a tailpipe. It's coming from the process of getting natural gas, coal out of the ground, getting it to an electric generating plant, the emissions from the electric generating plant, and any losses between that plant and in your home or the charging station. And so what I've done in my analysis is compared those emissions to the emissions from a gasoline vehicle, getting petroleum out of the ground, refining it into gasoline, getting gasoline to a filling station, and then, of course, burning it in a car. And when you do that, what we find is the emissions do depend on where in the country you are. So what I've done here is looked at, if you drove the average EV in different parts of the country, what would a gasoline car efficiency have to be to have the same emissions as an EV? And you can see it does change it over depending on where in the country you are. Now, if you look at the grid region that Oregon is part of, driving the average EV has emissions that are equal to 102 mile per gallon gasoline car. I should say a hypothetical 102 mile per gallon gasoline car, because of course one doesn't exist. So that's about half the emissions of a very efficient non-plug-in hybrid like a Prius, and it's about a third of the emissions from the average new vehicle. And but if you're really concerned about emissions, if that's the primary thing that you're concerned about, then you should be looking at, well, what about if I drive the most efficient EV out there? And in that case, for the Oregon region, it's about equal to 134 mile per gallon gasoline car. So much, much cleaner than a gasoline car. And that's today with the amount of fossil fuel we have on our grids today. And so, going in the future, as we continue to decrease the use of coal, increase the use of renewables, these numbers will just get better, and the emissions from EVs will drop. One of the other reasons I mentioned was air quality. So, and particularly looking at fine particulate matter, because it has human health effects, beyond just your lungs. So, I think it's intuitive that if you breathe in small particles, that it might lead to lung disease. But because these particles are so small, they can actually get very deep into the lungs, get into the bloodstream. And so exposure to fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, also has cardiovascular impacts, stroke, heart attack. And so there is there are very good reasons to try to reduce the amount of PM 2.5 we're exposed to. And while the rural regions of the state have fairly low exposure to PM 2.5 from on-road vehicles, and this is on-road vehicles including heavier vehicles, but light-duty vehicles like passenger cars and trucks are a large part of this. You do see that, like in some of the more urban areas like Portland, Salem, Eugene, there are places where the exposure to on-road transportation pollution is from air pollution is in the top 20th percentile for exposure nationwide. So there are parts in the cities in Oregon where there's a significant exposure to transportation air quality pollution, and this is where switching from gasoline to electricity can help reduce that exposure to air pollution. And then I did mention, just the cost aspects. So if you look here looking at the average gasoline price recently in Portland, and looking at the average new gasoline car of 29 miles per gallon, you'd be spending over $1,000 per year on gasoline with that vehicle. Now, if you compare that to a battery electric vehicle using PGE standard rate, it's less than half of that at just over $400 per year. And if you use a time of use rate, that's the rate where you get a lower price during the evening and nighttime period, so you can charge your vehicle at night when you're not driving it. It can be under $400 per year for an average EV, battery electric vehicle, that is. And then in sort of the Portland area, there's also the possibility of signing up for an annual membership with the Electric Avenue project. And that gives you $300 a year for public charging. So if you just use the public charging stations, you could have even a lower annual fuel cost. And the other thing, that I don't have on here is that while electricity prices do go up over time, like everything, the prices for electricity are much more stable than gasoline. So not only is there lower prices, but sort of a greater surety in how much it's going to cost to refuel. Beyond just the cost of gasoline, there's also potential maintenance and upkeep savings. So with a battery electric vehicle, you have no engine. So you don't get the joy of having to do oil changes or a lot of other maintenance on the car. And in particular, I just want to just sort of dive into that. What does that actually mean for your sort of everyday life? Well, here's the maintenance schedule for a 2017 Chevy Bolt EV. You can see here that you do have to do some maintenance. You have to rotate the tires every 7,500 miles. Every 2 years, you need to replace a passenger compartment air filter. And then at 150,000 miles, you need to drain and refill the coolant system. Now, compare that to a similarly sized 2017 Chevy Trax. Well, you get to rotate the tires still. You also get to change the engine oil every 7,500 miles. You still get to replace the passenger compartment air filter, but you also get to replace the engine air filter, the spark plugs, the transmission fluid. You still get to replace the coolant, and then you have to check the belts and other components. So quite a bit more maintenance that on the scheduled maintenance for a conventional vehicle versus that all-electric vehicle. And so these are all the real practical reasons you can help the environment. You can reduce air pollution in your state. You can maybe save on gasoline and maintenance. But the last thing I wanted to point out is that these vehicles can really be fun to drive because because they use an electric motor. When you press on the go pedal, the car responds instantaneously. You don't have to wait for an engine to rev up. You don't have to wait for a transmission to shift. They have very good acceleration because of that instant response and because of the high torque that an electric motor has at stop versus a gasoline engine. And so I guess my point here is that there's a lot of reasons why you can justify and really do the right thing by choosing an electric vehicle over a gasoline vehicle. but and you can make it, you can look at how it can save you money over the long run, but it can also just be just a better option fundamentally, even if you don't look at those benefits, a better option for your next vehicle. And so hopefully I've laid out some of the considerations, some of the benefits of EVs. And I think next up, I believe we have, so I just want to thank Forth for giving me the space and time to talk about what we do at UCS and our thinking around electric vehicles. And I think I'm going to send it now back to Steven and Whit for a discussion of the Oregon's electric vehicle rebate program.
All right. Yeah, we're back up. I think we're going to run some polls right now, if that is good with you, Stephen and Crystal. Yeah. Gotcha. There we go. Let this run a little longer. While we're here, thank you, Dave, for joining us. That was a great presentation, and really enjoyed that. All right. Leave it up for 5 more seconds. All right. And do we have a second poll? I was on a webinar recently where we had a question that everybody responded the same answer, and it was quite surprising, but it made sense for the question. Getting a little bit of diversity here in answers, but looks like operations and fuel cost savings are by far the most exciting. Awesome. Leave it up for another 5 seconds. Okay. Looks like we're getting some attendee chat, which is always great. Once again, please leave any questions you have, in the attendee chat, and we'll get to them during the Q&A section in just 5-10 minutes here. Next up. So kind of moving to a slightly different topic about how EV batteries can create an opportunity for a cleaner electric grid and also provide resiliency to their owners. V2G tech, or vehicle to grid technology, encompasses a wide variety of technologies and ways of managing charging that we're not going to get into right now, but this technology really provides an opportunity for the grid to optimize for a variety of things, cost primarily, and also really reducing carbon. So if electric vehicles are controlled, you can prioritize renewable energy going into battery backup and electric vehicles during times where you've got excess solar energy coming in or excess wind, which we frequently do have, especially at night when wind is a little bit more prevalent in some areas. And it's not just passenger vehicles that are going to provide this benefit to the grid. It's vehicles like heavy duty trucks and school buses, which sit most of the time and can provide an excellent resource to the grid to provide stability and additional flexibility for when there's excess renewable energy generation, or when the grid actually needs some energy from vehicles. So these electric buses can actually provide power for the grid, and not just buses, obviously consumer vehicles as well. The technology is coming along, and I'm excited to see some more commercial products out there in the coming years that your average consumer could purchase and install into their house, and connect up with their utility and provide more flexibility and resiliency for when power goes out. But batteries are not just limited to four wheels or heavy duty, medium duty vehicles. You also have a lot of electric batteries in scooters, in bikes, in other delivery vehicles, and that bottom right is the Fun Utility Vehicle by Arcimoto. And all of these are going to have batteries that will last a while they're in use for their first use, but they're also going to have life after their first use. Pardon my slides. Once their first use is up, they are going to have more than one life, and in some cases you could see second, third, fourth, fifth, and even more lives if the batteries are not too depleted. So here are some locations where groups are working on energy storage and a variety of other roles for second use batteries. All right, and then my favorite slide, which is why I'm leaving it for last, some examples of where batteries really come in handy, off-grid and on-grid energy storage, and awesome projects like this electric ferry in the UK are just perfect examples of uses that you can use these batteries for after their first life. Usually the first life is considered, the battery starts at 100% and gets down to about 70 to 80%. But after that 70 to 80%, you still have a lot of life left in those cells, and there's a significant amount of value in those battery packs, even after the vehicle is no longer usable or considered commercially viable. But to get there first, we got to get through the first use. And when you're looking to buy an electric vehicle, whether it's right now, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years out, or more, obviously, you should know about the incentives that are available to you, and especially the federal tax credit of up to $7,500 off the purchase of a new or used plug-in electric vehicle. For some plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, the value is a little bit lower because of the battery size. But it's also important to check in with your local utility in case there's utility incentives. And I'll hand it off to my colleague, Steven, where he will go into some of the details of the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program.
Awesome. Thank you for that presentation, Whit. And I'll just say that if you check in with your utility, your local utility, sometimes they have deals on local chargers. Not typically off the car themselves, but if you need a level 2 charger that you'd like to have installed at your home, that is a great route to go. And you can, we'll cover more about that in Whit's presentation after my presentation about the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate. All right, let's jump in for a quick program overview. So in case folks here were not aware, there are 2 rebates. One is called the standard rebate. That is up to $2,500 off the purchase or lease of a new electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The charge ahead rebate is $2,500 off the purchase or lease of a new or used electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid. But that one you have to qualify as a low to moderate income Oregon driver. If you're able to combine both of those, that's a total of $5,000 off. And then if you combine that with the federal tax credit that we mentioned earlier, you can get quite a bit of savings off of electric vehicles, which is really awesome. All right. So going into program eligibility a little bit more, here's some information about both the standard and charge ahead rebate. For the standard rebate, as I mentioned, it's up to $2,500 off. You have to be an Oregon resident, a business, a nonprofit, or government agency that's at least associated with Oregon and working in Oregon a lot. And then for the charge ahead rebate, it works for new or used battery electric vehicles, and plug-in hybrids. But the vehicles have to have a base MSRP of under $50,000. So what that means as far as a base MSRP, the vehicle could be up to $50,000, and then if you build anything else on top of that, like if you get higher trim level than normal, that vehicle will still qualify as long as the base MSRP is under $50,000. So an example of a vehicle that's fairly expensive but would still qualify is the Tesla Model 3. Even if you scaled it up above $50,000, it would still qualify. To qualify for the charge ahead rebate, you have to be under the statistical average for your metropolitan statistical area, or not the statistical average, the median income for the statistical average in your metropolitan area. Sorry, it's a mouthful. Another thing to cover about the standard rebate here is that if you were to get a zero emission motorcycle, the maximum you'd be able to qualify for that rebate is $750. That's based on battery size. And if you were to get a plug-in hybrid that had less than a 10 kilowatt hour battery, an example of two plug-in hybrids that have under a 10 kilowatt hour battery are the Subaru Crosstrek and the Hyundai Ioniq. Both of them are right around 8.9 and 8.8 as far as kilowatt hours. An example of plug-in hybrid that is over 10 kilowatt hours is the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid, or the RAV4 Prime that is coming out later. All right, some more background information about the standard rebate. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to be an Oregon resident with proof of Oregon residency. You have to purchase or lease a new battery electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid, or zero emission motorcycle, and you have to register that vehicle in Oregon and retain that registration for at least 2 years. You have 6 months to submit your application. That's true for all of these, and that's 6 months after the purchase or lease date. Charge ahead rebate, a lot of the stuff is very similar, but like I mentioned earlier, you have to qualify as a low or moderate income household. And these change sometimes of how the qualifications work. So if you're at all curious, I would definitely recommend applying. It's always worth to at least see if you do qualify, and this is the website to check that out. Let's see, is there anything else I didn't cover here? Oh yeah, that's a calculator, as I mentioned. Great. For businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies, you can actually use the standard rebate, but you can only use 10 per calendar year. So you can't get, once you get 15, 5 of those won't count for the rebate, or won't qualify for the rebate. You have to be in Oregon or have an Oregon based affiliation at the time the vehicle is purchased or leased. Once again, you have to maintain a Oregon registration for at least 2 years, and you have to submit that application within 6 months. The big difference here is for businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies is you will have to submit annual usage data to DEQ for up to 3 years. So here's some frequently asked questions and where you can find the answers to those. You can download the application online. Essentially, how to apply is proof of temporary or permanent vehicle registration, a copy of the sales or lease contract, and proof of Oregon residency. So that can be a driver's license, whatever you've got. And the deadline is 6 months after that purchase or lease date. If you have any other questions, I highly recommend checking out the site. If anyone has questions and wants to go through it during the Q&A, I'm happy to pull it up. All right, if you have any additional questions about the Oregon Clean Vehicle rebates, feel free to reach out to myself or the Oregon OCVRP at energycenter.org email. We'll be able to get you the answers to your questions, and if we can't, we will just forward them on to DEQ. All right, before we jump into charging, we're going to take a quick break for another 2 poll questions. So we'll get those running for you now. All right, and once we wrap up this poll, I will hand the presentation back over to my colleague Whit Jamieson to cover how to find available public charging stations.
All right, thank you, Steven. And yeah, so if you're in the if you're trying to find some public charging stations, we would recommend some apps such as Chargeway and PlugShare and ChargeHub. There are many others, so the list is quite long, especially when you consider all of the EV charging networks out there. They each have their own app, and often you'll need to use that app once you're at the station. There are quite a few charging stations around, especially in urban areas. And the gaps where there are gaps in charging are being filled in over the next few years. I think we'll see a lot of that, especially as the Biden administration promotes EV charging. 2 examples of those charging networks are the Tesla Supercharging Network and the Electrify America charging network. While Electrify America has only been around for a few years, they have rapidly deployed many different charging stations, especially fast charging stations, ones that will be able to charge your EV up in general from 5 to 10% up to 80% in between 20 minutes and an hour, depending on the hardware in your vehicle and the charging station you're at. Similarly, Tesla charging stations will also be able to charge your car up or your Tesla up very quickly in that 20 to 40 minute range. Yeah. And so for any of you who like taking long road trips, like most of us, I recommend checking out the Chargeway trip planning feature. And it will show you whether it thinks you can get to that spot through various number of charges along the way, or if it doesn't think you'll have enough range, it'll show you a warning, hey, you might not make it. You can also adjust based on temperature and speed, your average speed of travel. Some electric vehicles that are coming soon and are actually already out, as we'll see in just a second. or maybe a couple of seconds. One example of a vehicle that's coming out soon is the Rivian R1T and its sibling, the R1S, which is a full-sized SUV, both with pretty long range and decently expensive as well. This one's a truck, and it's got some fun features as well. One of those fun features is the fact that it has individual wheel drive, so an electric motor for each wheel, which obviously does a lot for the acceleration of this vehicle. And I think their 0 to 60 time is around 2.5 to 3 seconds. So very, very quick. You can probably see these as early as mid to the end of year. The R1T is supposed to come out at the end of summer. The R1S is supposed to come out towards the start of Q4. And most of those vehicles, if not all of them, are already reserved. But I'm excited to see them on the road after many years of hype. And then there's the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is already out. I think if you look at their page right now, you could reserve one for mid-year. This vehicle has all-wheel drive options and decent range as well. This vehicle is, of course, applicable for the federal tax credit, and all of these vehicles are applicable for the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebates, which are great. Feel free to ask any questions about any of these vehicles in the chat. The Nissan Ariya is coming out in December, I want to say, of 2021, and is another vehicle that will have all-wheel drive and is a SUV, so another lower cost than some of your Teslas, especially after that federal tax credit, but should also have some really good range. Okay. The Volkswagen ID4 is another one of these crossover SUVs. There is a theme here. And will also have the federal tax credit applicable. This vehicle will have options for all-wheel drive as well. I think that 250 miles of range is going to be updated soon because they have a standard range and a longer range. So the ranges won't all be the same, you know. New incoming vehicle that just learned about over the past few weeks is the Chevy Bolt EV, and I'm sure many people have heard of the Chevy Bolt EV, which is getting a kind of a facelift a little bit, but its sibling vehicle, the EUV, the electric utility vehicle, is a little bit bigger, and they both got are pretty in the low 30s to start. So I'm very excited to see those vehicles as well. So I think there was a question earlier on about what about used vehicles, and this is an area that I try to keep my thumb on the pulse regularly. We are lucky in Oregon to have a dealership that specializes in used battery electric vehicles, specifically called Platt Auto. They're here in Milwaukee, Portland, Oregon area. But I mean, you can come to them or call them up and see if they can get out to you. Not sure if that's still going on, but they have a lot of low-priced electric vehicles out there right now. And they update their website regularly, and I've seen Chevy Bolts lower than 14,000, as you can see on that on our screenshot right there, as well as Nissan Leafs from 2018, 2019 with 150 miles of range for well less than $15,000. And one of the really cool things that is just now starting to happen is off-lease Tesla Model 3s are starting to hit the market, and I would expect that to lower some of these used and even some of the new vehicles, what their prices are going for. It's always good to remember that there are the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebates applicable to these vehicles, if you qualify for the Charge Ahead rebate. And while it's not a used vehicle, there's some really good prices on the Nissan Leaf, including the Nissan Leaf Plus, which is the 226 mile range vehicle, as opposed to the 150 mile ranged Leaf, just standard. And yeah, I think we can have our presenters turn on their chats, and we can take some questions. Got about 10 minutes.
All right. And I think we have a couple questions already up, so I will just ask the questions, and we can see whoever wants to jump in and take them on. So first question here that I see here is, I own an electric bike. Is this considered an EV?
Depends.
I'll say I also own an electric bike. That was my normal commute to the UCS office in the before times, and so I really enjoyed that commute. It's a commute you can actually enjoy, but I think it raises a larger question, not just about sort of what we're calling an electric vehicle or not. Is that electric vehicles are definitely a solution for reducing emissions and the impacts of personal transportation and driving. Replacing an electric car with a gasoline car is a huge savings in terms of emissions and has benefits. But if we really want to meet our targets in terms of reducing climate changing emissions, we're also going to have to figure out how to reduce driving, and not just so using EVs for the trips that we need to use them for, but then using other transit, biking, e-biking, and other car sharing solutions, so that we can also reduce the amount of driving that we're doing. So I think it's e-bikes are part of that solution, but maybe not part of this particular conversation about replacing gasoline cars, but certainly need to be part of the broader transportation set of transportation solutions going forward.
I would like to add to that. I know there was a rumor that either a senator or a House member was going to suggest some federal legislation that would provide a tax rebate for buying an electric bike. So I wouldn't be too surprised if that comes through in the next few years. I'm hopeful. I'm crossing my fingers, but I don't know if that's just a rumor or if that has some feet to stand on. But yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next question then, because we have quite a few here. This one likely will be more geared to you, Whit. So let's see. The biggest downside of EVs for me is the massive amount of resources it takes to make them. Oh wait, actually, I think I have one more before that.
We can do that one first if you want.
Yeah. So roughly, 1,000 pounds vehicle, 1,000 pounds of battery used to move a 150 pounds. What do you, or how would you address that? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, I think Dave definitely will have some good input on this one as well. I think what that question's really asking is just a kind of more about mode shifting. We've created our cities so that cars are so necessary, when in fact the best way to decarbonize our society is really to create cities that are more walkable, more bikeable, and get away from the need for a big vehicle to haul around a single person. But at the same time, people need to be able to do their shopping and put a lot of food and stuff into a car and move it around. So an electric vehicle does a better job, a more efficient job of moving stuff and moving people around and creating less pollution. Dave, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, the other part of it is sort of like, what are you're looking at beyond sort of driving on electricity, looking at the manufacturing of EVs versus gasoline vehicles. That's something that we've done some analysis around as well. And, there are right now higher emissions for building an electric vehicle than a comparable gasoline vehicle, mostly because of the emissions in making the battery. When we're talking about global warming emissions. But what we find is that the increased emissions for building an electric vehicle are much, much smaller than the savings from using an electric vehicle. And so, that sort of initial emissions debt is sort of paid off, depending on where in the country you are, between around 6 to 16 months. It's something that we're definitely research that we're looking at updating in this coming year, but definitely is something that we need to take into account, not just the using these vehicles, but manufacturing them and reducing as much emissions as we can from that part of the process as well.
Yeah, and I would just say that adding on to that, there's also a lot more components from an electric vehicle that can be repurposed than an internal combustion engine. Okay, this is actually the question I was mainly gearing towards Whit before I got a little confused on that last one. Okay, so new EVs are expensive with fast depreciation. Understanding we all have different needs and looking to buy what is the best bang for the buck? Type, range, etc.
Yeah, this is a question I often got when I was at our showcase in downtown Portland. What's the best buy right now, especially if you're looking at the used vehicle market? Depends on your needs, obviously. It always depends on your needs. That is the first question I always ask people when they're asking me, what vehicle should I buy? Right now, I'd say if you can go with a two-wheel drive vehicle, I would highly recommend the Chevy Bolt from 2017 through 2019. And of course, there's some really good new deals on the Chevy Bolt as well. But in terms of range per cost, the Chevy Bolt from 2017 through 2019 is going to be your best bet, as well as some Nissan Leafs from 2018 that are just coming off lease, where you're going to get a good amount of range for a pretty low cost. There are other options, of course. You got some older Nissan Leafs that if you're just looking for a car around town, you're going to be able to do that and potentially even buy it for $5,000 to $10,000 easily. Especially if you want to check out Platt Auto. I mean, I check it out occasionally, and I've never not seen a situation where they had multiple vehicles for under $10,000, and around town, that's gonna be perfect. If you're looking for a longer range vehicle, I would go with the Chevy Bolt, the 2018 Nissan Leaf, or if you're really trying to go for a much longer range vehicle, a off-lease 2018 or 2018 Model 3.
Awesome. Thank you, Whit. I see a quick question here. Let's see. The Oregon rebate I've heard is taking it's very slow. How long should it take to get a check after your application is made? I believe DEQ has 6 months to get you that check. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. The reason I'm saying sometimes is it varies, and with everyone at DEQ working from home, I think that slowed down the process a little bit. And then another reason is there's a huge emphasis to make sure that none of these applications are fraudulent at all. And so that slows down the process as well. So my apologies for everyone who's been waiting on that rebate for a while. They're just trying to be really cautious and make sure it's done correctly. Let's see. And then here's another question. What do you need for home charging? Dave or Whit, do you want to
Dave,
jump on?
do you want to start, Dave?
Sure. So, I mean, it depends a bit on the vehicle and how you're going to drive it. So for like a plug-in hybrid, you essentially really just need a standard 3-prong plug within reach of the car, because those cars have batteries that have ranges in the sort of like the 30 to 40 mile range, and plugging it into a standard wall outlet is going to be slow, but if you have all night, it doesn't really matter because it's a fairly small battery. And so you're still going to get your full charge. Now, if you're going longer distances each day and you have a battery electric vehicle, you probably want what they call a level 2 charger, which is going to require a 220, 240 volt circuit. Sort of like, essentially the same thing you would have for an electric dryer. You may have that already near your garage, or you may need to sort of use an existing circuit to create a new one. And then and the good thing is a lot of people have their electric panel pretty close to their garage, their main electric panel. So oftentimes adding a 220 volt circuit is not cost prohibitive.
Well said.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to add, the other thing is that I think all new EVs come with a sort of a portable charging cord that can plug into that standard 3-prong outlet. So for some of the PHEVs, you might not need to actually install anything. Or even with the BEVs, you can look at is that slow charging meet your needs, and then decide to add the station later.
One of my rules of thumb is usually if your vehicle has a range of less than 100 miles, it's probably not necessarily worth it for you to install that level 2 charger, that 220 volt circuit. But if you've got a range of between 100 miles and 150 miles, it's kind of the question mark. Above 150 miles, you're probably going to want that level 2 so that you can get a full charge overnight. And in some cases, you won't be able to get that full charge overnight with the level 1 charger if you're at a 100-mile range vehicle. But for the most part, electric vehicles aren't driven, or frankly, any vehicles aren't driven over 100 miles in a single day. And you can kind of plan ahead for when you need that extra range. But I understand some people are in a different situation. So it, once again, goes back to what is your situation.
Yep, absolutely. And then our final question, which I'm pretty sure I can answer pretty quick, is do you have any information about the reasonings for late model EVs coming into the used market? I believe when you say late model, I'm assuming that you're talking about like 2018, 2017 models. Most of those coming into the used market are probably bought back after the end of a lease. So quite likely the person leased that EV for 3 years, and maybe they upgraded and leased a new electric vehicle or potentially bought one. But either way, leases are most of the reason for late models being on the used market. And I'll just say, if there's any questions that y'all had that we weren't able to answer, feel free to shoot us an email. This is our contact information, and thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.